So thank you guys for coming to part two of this four-part session this month, where my goal is to try to highlight some of the information that I'm finding while researching Alabama and Georgia and the Native Americans. So tonight's session is on the Melungeon, European Native American African Connection, part two of four. And how do we connect? And this is just my way of being able to break it down and explain what I've researched and what I've found. So the outline is as follows. I'm going to talk about researching the Melungeons, defining the Melungeon group, formation of the Melungeon group, types of complex relationships because of colonial period and slavery. And within that, I'll talk about consanguinity, European women and African men, Indian agents who married Native American women, Europeans who married Native Americans, individuals with Native American African origin, Native American chiefs and descendants who married Europeans. Could you be a descendant of the Melungeon group? And tracking Melungeon and free persons of color using GEDmatch. So as always, I share my grandmother is my motivation for any of my presentations. And all my goal is to find as many of her ancestors as to connect the dots, as many of us are trying to do with trying to figure out our DNA matches. DNA don't lie, it verifies. And as Rodney, someone has shared in the past and clarifies, but DNA don't lie. And so we're using DNA to try to substantiate our connection with people, but we can't figure out exactly how are we connected or related. So this is a slide that I share where DNA is distributed randomly. And that means me and my brother have the same parents, but my DNA on different chromosomes, I might be a match to some people and he is not. And it doesn't mean that I'm not related. It just means that it was distributed randomly. So that's why we want to connect with each other to try to figure out, do we see these genetic and these DNA connections? Now, researching the Melungeons. So defining the Melungeon group. So there are some parts of researching genealogy that we know and we feel we're not ready for. So there are some areas of research that we know we're not ready for, right? It's over our head, and there's so much that you have to try. You want to try to research that you know that this particular topic you're not ready. It just takes time. So in my researching 37 years, Native Americans, South Carolina, the colonial period, all of those were areas that I knew were very heavy in research, and I wasn't ready. But now that I've last year started embarking in DNA, and I now have a better understanding of trying to use different tools and understanding my DNA matches, I decided to get back to my Alabama roots and come back to Alabama and research the records in Alabama. So the Melungeon group, and we hear Lumbee and all of these different things, for me, it was going over my head. But this is the time that I wanted to take to try to slow down and get a better understanding of what was the meaning behind it. So the Melungeon is a cultural and genetic label, historically applied to isolated communities of people of mixed European, African, and Native American history. So the term was sometimes used pejoratively in the 18th and 19th centuries to describe people who didn't fit neatly into rigid racial categories of Black or white. And toward the bottom, it's sharing the groups that were formed by the blending of European settlers, the Scots, Irish, English, Portuguese. Because so it's so interesting to be able to know European incorporates all of these different areas, right? Because I have Scott descent, Irish descent, European, UK descent. All of those groups are incorporated in the European settlers. So being able to understand that they're in that group, right? Because that's the area where they came from, it's helpful to understand that that blend is just considered European. African Americans, free or formerly enslaved, and the Native Americans. So this, of course, we pull some information many times when we research from Chat GBT. And we know you have to research chat, just to be clear. But sometimes we just want chat to do that dirty work research, right? So this is saying that the Native Americans were primarily Cherokee, Sapani, Powhatan, and others from the southeast. But it's that others, right? Because there's the Muskogee Creeks. And so there are many other Native American blends. And without doing record research, you are going to miss understanding those connections. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. So, historical notes. The word appears in Virginia, Tennessee records, possibly include French, melange, mixture, or Arabic, melungeon, cursed soul. The communities were concentrated in Hancock, Tennessee. I'm going to explain how. No, not necessarily. Maybe that's speaking to a long, long time ago. But it really depends on how you're researching and where you're researching. And the legal society identity and census and court records. Melungeons were variably classified as free persons of color, mulatto, or sometimes white, depending on the time and the period. So as we're starting to look at mulatto labels, we're missing or believing that that has to do with African American or enslaved and European or white connection, and not always and not necessarily. So we don't want to be um, boxing ourselves into believing that is what that label, because we might be missing a connection. So the modern understanding today, Melungeon is recognized both as a self-identity among descendants and as a historical term that describes the mixing of these different blends of origins of people. It's not a tribe, it's not an ethnicity. So, so the common areas or the common groups we tend to hear, like I said, the Lumbee were from North Carolina. Historically documented triracial community with Native African and European. Melungeons, Appalachia, a group in Tennessee, Virginia, and Kentucky with Native American, African, and European. Narragansett, Rhode Island, the Black Seminoles in Florida. And a great deal of this has to do with what tribes were in the locale. A lot of this has to do with the tribal origin in the locale. And so at the bottom, this is giving a conversation of why weren't they more widely published? So as I started researching, enslavement and laws forbidding literacy limited publication. So this blending of Native Americans into these different origins of people, um, they weren't writing American English. They weren't writing English. And so therefore documenting their lives and their history was not done until they assimilated with the Europeans, right? Many mixed heritage people were classified simply as free people of color, like it says, and the voices often appear in petitions, court cases, oral histories rather than books. Okay. So the formation of these Melungeon groups. So this is where ChatGPT can be awesome, right? Because so as I was thinking about it, as it pertains to over time, right? And when did this blending start occurring? So this is a slide that's showing the Native Americans, and I just went as far back as 1500, and I'll share a slide that's going to talk about their origin. But let's start with 1500, right? So as early as 1500, as you can see, this green line is identifying that the Native Americans were high here in America, right? North America. And then all the way from 1500, but then as we got to go towards 1650, then it starts dropping off greatly. And I had heard until I started researching this information in the last couple of months or so. You heard that Europeans brought diseases which ended up eventually killing off the Native Americans that were here. And so Native Americans' high early presence declined due to displacement. So as through sicknesses and as they're not wanting to assimilate or, those kinds of things and wars that we may have heard about. So then, yes, over time, they were very high in the land, but then their presence started to fall off. especially when it comes to, and we'll talk about the ceding of the land, the cessions that occurred when they finally gave up their land to relocate to Oklahoma or somewhere else. So this is just showing that, a great, loving, beautiful map, 1492, they were all over North America. So is, as I said, I started at 1500. There's other maps. They were all over here from the present of time. So yeah, I mean, so let's keep in mind and level set. Native Americans are always here, have always been here as early as 1500. So then we had the Europeans as they started coming over here to Native America, North America, I'm sorry. And then as they started coming over, and then they wanted to, try to see what's going on in this big body of land that they wanted to eventually take over, but they had to get the lay of the land. So as they arrived around 1550, their presence started to increase. So over the next 50 years, you see the chart is showing from 1550 to 1600. Now European presence became very high here. And then from 1600 all the way to 1650, they're still high. Then eventually, and actually, this is not just talking about Europeans, I'm sorry. This is talking about the indentured servants. So as the Europeans came, someone had to work the land. They needed a body of work. And so many of them were like, okay, so they had indentured servants, the presence of indentured servants, which I'll talk about in a little bit, who was going to come over here and work off a debt. So they came here to work with the Europeans that were here. After a period of time, like generally 7 years, then they would become free. But then about 1650, and you'll see that slope is starting to curve. You remember with the Native Americans, it starts to decline because now they started realizing as slavery started, chattel slavery, they decided they didn't want people to become free. They wanted to have them enslaved forever, as they documented. So indentured servitude started to fall off. And remember, there was the Native Americans that started to fall off. And so the indentured servitude labor system where individuals work for a period of time, 4 to 7 years, in exchange for passage to the New World. They were not considered property and they had legal rights. And this included not just European men and women, it included African men and women. Many of them came here as free people. So now we got a level set. We got the Native Americans, then we have the indentured servitude, the indentured servants, both African and European came here. And so now we have these three blends of people that are here around the same periods of time. And then the enslaved Africans in the chattel slavery. So very low, again, we had the Native Americans who were enslaved for a short period of time. Then we had the indentured servants came over about 1600 enslaved. And then as that declined, chattel slavery started to increase. And that's when the transatlantic slave trade started occurring. They started bringing slaves here from over Africa and other areas. And that's when that became high. So there's this transition of all of these bodies of people here at the same period of time. And then this is showing a chart of the blending of all those bodies of people going from 1500 and then up into 1750 when it was high with the Melungeon community where they actually started to blend. And I'll start talking about my interpretation of that in a minute. And I like to throw this. So my last presentation, I threw the bonanza in here, and mainly because great series, TV show that depicted what life looked like at that time. I think, oh my God, I think Bonanza was on for at least 20 to 30 years. They were on for a long period of time with many episodes. And we got to see Native Americans represented on the show and how life was like and how they felt about Europeans trying to come in. But then we also see sometimes in the same episode where they married into those families. And so now this blending is starting to occur. And as well, we know that there were indentured servants, European and African. At the same time, the Europeans are blending with the Native Americans. And so why wouldn't there have been a blending of African or enslaved person or a free person of color having married into any mixture of these relationships that occurred. And this is that chart of all of them coming together from one period of time all the way over to 1800. And this is showing that, yes, so the enslaved persons, as it peaked until 1700, 1750, right about 1750, we have all of these communities of people that are here and blending here in America, right? North America. And so, yeah, why wouldn't it be the possibility we have Native American or descent? So, with that, I wanted to have this conversation about what I liken to the complex relationships. What's a technical term for these Melungeon relationships coming together, and then they're having children, and then they're having descendants? And so, consanguinity is a term I found. I think it's likened to other terms, but I prefer it because it's talking about sometimes it was more forced relationships. But then as I started looking at this Native American top conversation, these were not necessarily forced. These were volunteer relationships that occurred. Think about it. Europeans came here. Who else was here? Men came here on boats to check out the lay of the land. All you had was Native American women who were beautiful women. Why wouldn't they want to, you know, find they were interested in connecting with these women? And then when they started having slaves and all of these other things started occurring, all of this is a different way of looking at that complex blend of heritage, inheritance that occurred here in America, right? And this is a conversation about the Native Americans. So this is a chart. This is a topic where I'm talking about the devils in the details. Meaning, as we're taking a look at the relationships coming together and then the separation of families, where we get why we have the confusion of trying to build the connections between our family lines. So this is a chart and a view that I did on when I was talking about indentured servants. And think about this. So we have indentured servants and then the enslaver. So the indentured servant came here to work off a debt. But hey, they decide, I think this person's cute. I think I want to talk to this person. I think I want to have relations with this person. So the enslaved person, the enslaver, number one, he already has his wife and his family. So this is showing a representation of the slaveholder and his family. The blue is showing a representation, and I'm going to say the slave and the indentured servant and the relationships and the families that they ended up having. So then when that slaveholder and enslaver started having relations, or when they started choosing to blend, or it was a forced blend amongst those families, you're going to have overlap. You're absolutely going to have overlap. And then when the enslaver decides to sell off his slaves or gift his slaves to his family members when they marry, and then they travel to other places like Georgia. So this was a conversation about Maryland. But they're in Georgia now, and they're in South Carolina, and they're going to Alabama, and they're taking slaves, or they're taking people from the blue corner that is an established enslaved family or Native American family. As they started blending with other races, you better believe that over time, these people this is what's called the consanguineous mating, that the families separated. So they went from place A, and then they had their children, and the children got removed to a different location, a different place and time. So now we have over 50 years, 100 years, and 200 years. The blue side represents a family that never left. So this is a conversation about Maryland. Family members have been in Maryland for 200-300 years. You never left. What is the likelihood that you are going to be doubly related, triple related to one another? Because over time, you start losing sight of how you're related. But then when that family was removed to Georgia and South Carolina, what is the likelihood that they're going to have double connections or relations to all of these different people, separation doesn't mean you're not connected. DNA, it DNA, it defines, it clarifies, it verifies. So the DNA that we're seeing is helping us to determine these relationships. But depending on how far back it goes, of course, that's why our DNA matches and centimorgans are small. And that's why we have to be careful when we're researching, trying to figure out our connection in this place, in this way. So this is a conversation real quickly about the mulatto children born to European women and African men. So these are going to be those indentured servants who were European women who purposely chose to have children with the indentured servants or slaves because that became their choice. And so understanding what's the devil's in the detail of the documents, DNA is not going to pull this out. And at some point, as you're researching enslavement, you're going to have to stop looking at DNA and hoping someone's going to have these records in their trees. And you're going to have to figure out what you got to do to go look at these records. Because this is the only thing that's going to help us to figure out where these connections lie, right? So manumissions basically were when the formal process by which enslaved individuals were granted their freedom by their enslavers. And whether it was inheritance, whether it was voluntarily, they chose to want to free them because they had been a great, faithful servant for their whole time they had been with them, or it could have been through they were their children, and this was their way of trying to right whatever or set them up in a positive light. But at the end of the day, these relationships blended free people of color. And so this is that one set of connection, right, that occurred that doesn't have to do with anything about Native American at this time, at this moment. But freedom by birthright, when those children were born, in the beginning, because they were born of a free woman, they were free. They were supposed to be free. They were due to be free. But over time, they felt it was a disgrace for these women to purposely choose to mate with enslaved or African people. And so basically, they created laws in order to shame them, or in order for them to say, okay, these children are not going to remain free. So they will have to serve us for 30 years before they get their freedom. So laws started changing and being erected to try to control all of these possibly free mulatto African American people that were born. And so this is just identifying a particular record in Maryland's system of a woman who was choosing to have mixed race children from slavery and the marriage. And so what did it mean to be bonded? So the point of bonding had to do with, now we have these free people of color who are now being born, and in order for them to prove themselves worthy of their freedom when eventually they will get it, they had to be bonded to a European person, someone who can say, I will follow them, I will watch them. If they violated their moral duty, or if they stole from someone, if they did anything, then they would lose their right to be free. So not only do we have the possibility that they were free because their mothers were white, who had children by African American, African enslaved, and these indentured servants, but they had to be bonded. Someone had to monitor them to make sure that they were going to do the right thing. But of course, so in the first 7 years, I'm bonded. Let's say I'm a child, I'm 3, I'm 10. I don't know anything about the law. But then now maybe I'm sent away to go learn a trade away from my family. I may not know the fact that I should have been free. So there were always different things that were done to trick them into losing their freedom. This was a document that was done where I'm pulling the information from Descendants of Free People of Color, that was written by Paul Hennig, and it is online. And what is amazing about this, that if you want to know if you're descending from European women, let's start there. The first people that were here in this country, indigent servants, African enslaved and indigent servants, as well as European. He's documented what he did is he documented out of the records and put it online for us to be able to view. So the Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, there was an area for that. Maryland, the colonial tax list. So what I learned by taking some time to get an understanding about Maryland's records and how Maryland does their documentation of enslavement, what I was told was Maryland wanted to make sure they got every dollar that was due them for taxes. So their tax records actually included names and ages so that they would bill or charge the slaveholder or the person the proper amount they owed for their property. Unlike Alabama, Alabama just says the number, it might have ages, but there are no names. So Maryland records are some really great records to research. I have not looked at North Carolina or South Carolina or any of the other states here, but Mr. Heineck has provided us the ability to look at them online. So there is service in the Revolutionary War. What free people of color serviced in the Revolutionary War? There's the 19th century photos of free African American and Indian families. Virginia slaves freed after 1782. Northampton, North Carolina, after emancipation. East Indians in colonial Maryland and North Carolina. Slaves named in the Halifax County, North Carolina, and King George County, Virginia wills. Illinois, which I just skipped, Tennessee, and Indiana. So that's a big body of information for you to dissect and to digest. But if our research lends us into Virginia and lends us into North Carolina, and we know we have matches that are trying to direct us in that area, it's a great place to take a look and see if you're matching any of these names. So I did a presentation a couple of months ago about Maryland and Delaware. And this was the area in Maryland and Delaware. We were researching the Frederick, Maryland area. And this was all of the people that I could pull out of that information. That was what I was looking for, was strictly Maryland, Frederick, Maryland. I wanted to see if I had DNA connections in that area. What was my connection to Frederick, Maryland? But this covers Maryland and Delaware, the big body of it. And it shows you all of the surnames. So as we're looking at DNA matches, we're typing in the name, seeing we have a match in our tree. Great body of work to be able to see, do we descend from free people of color? And so researching the free people of color connection, basically on the website, it has a list of all the family members that came from that particular area. And basically, as I did a search for the last name in ancestry in Frederick, Maryland, or Maryland, to see if I had any matches, this is a great way to see maybe this is where my connection is. So this body is just really only about free people of color, right? So I'm going to show you what brown looked like. So I looked at brown. So this is highlighting just talking about where this particular Brown name, Eleanor Brown, was born 1689. She was a servant of Thomas Ricketts. And so names start popping out. And what I like to do is I read and I hear a name, I go and see, do I got a DNA match? Because doing that doesn't mean you're related to Ricketts. It means that those slaves or free people could have taken that name. By them taking that name, that would have allowed you a great place to determine how you're related. So this body of work highlights Eleanor, then it talks about her two children, John and Margaret. Then it talks about their children. And then Margaret was born 1716. She was 7 years old, a mulatto with 24 years to serve, where she was valued at 11 pounds. So this is showing you that because she was born free, she was indentured for 30 years probably, or 28 years or so, before she could get her freedom. But then when she had children, if she had children by slaves, they were enslaved for life, but she had her bonded and she had her time that she could serve for her freedom. So these laws really made it tricky to be able to track and for us to try to figure out and understand. It's amazing when a body of work has already been done ahead of what we're trying to do. So this is just highlighting that same body of work. Anne Brown, born 1739, she was in Prince George's court. She may have been identical to Nanny Brown. So, like, I research information. This has already been done for us. It's amazing body of work. This is showing how their names may have changed over periods of time. And all of this is showing that in Kent County, there was an Elizabeth Brown. The last name had an E on it. So all of this is just really highlighting for you that first, there was the possibility of free people of color. Do we descend from white women who purposely chose to have children with slaves and indentured servants who were African of origin? So what I basically did was go to go to DNA matches, type in Brown. This is the names that came back for me. So I look in their tree to get an understanding. And of course I filter it to Frederick, or I'm gonna filter it from Maryland. But this is how you blend DNA with your research. The same I did the same thing for this name Johnson, because the Johnsons were in Frederick, Maryland, and I wanted to try to see could I find this whole connection. And this is just in that document, everything about that the Johnsons that I need to look at and to try to track. So as I saw the name Johnson, went to Ancestry, search for Johnsons in Maryland. This particular person here, Terry Johnson, I like to look at the origin. This person has no African. So that means he's of European descent, Scotland and the Netherlands. So that tells me we share the same ancestor, even though your line does not have African origin. So it gives me a starting place to be able to figure out where do I look for who did the deed, is what I like to call it. What else can we call it? African American connection again. This was this person here, Eve 960, and my connection through my brother. What I was able to be able to glean out of that, she has she has African origin, but Irish as well. But then as I looked at her profile, she has paternal and maternal. And whereas, of course, we know our lines, my paternal is Jamaica and England. So my connection to her is pulling shared matches on both sides. Of course, that's very interesting because I know the paternal side is Jamaican. And then as I looked at this tree, I see in Frederick there was a Thomas T. Johnson. And so now that particular line had no African. Okay, then that means someone on my father's side connecting out of England. And so I go build a tree and I go look for our connection and I add them to my tree because I'm related to this person. This Thomas T. Johnson is a mulatto. I looked at his profile and he's a mulatto who died. He was born in Frederick, died in Pennsylvania. And so these are ways that we use records to try to confirm what we see in the DNA. But without the two, you can't do it. This is showing you that paternal line for this connection that I have added to my tree, but then the maternal side that I have added to my tree because Johnson is pulling on both sides. And this is my researching in these lines. So, of course, we're going to always be researching. We're constantly looking for records and information that solidifies it. But the goal is to do your diligence, and adding records and information from other people doesn't help you to understand your story for me. So Native Americans and the European connection. So this is going to be, so that was about European women having mulatto children with African indentured servants and slaves. Now this is the Native Americans and they're having families with European connection. So something to consider and to think about, as I was talking about Bonanza and the Cartwrights living on the land and Virginia City. Now, mind you, that period of time they depicted on TV was 1860. I'm talking about the 1700s. What I really liked about that body of work, it allowed me to visually see what life was like. And so that's why I added it to the slide as a reference of what life looked like on the landscape of the land how it was amazing to think about, because as I'm reading about Native Americans, if you stole a horse, they killed you. That was your punishment, point blank, period. There was no court, there was no jails. You went to jail, then you died, or you got hung. That was the law. So understanding what life was like at that period of time helps us to better understand the research we're doing in this body of work in this period of time. So this is a map that's showing when they were giving up their land. The Native Americans were ceding their land to America. And this is showing the different dates and time periods when that was occurring. So as we're researching Alabama and Georgia, this is showing you what Native American tribes were there at the time, what period of time they gave up their land to go to Oklahoma. And as we know, the Alabama and the number 10 became the Trail of Tears and the forced removal. But prior to that forced removal, there were a lot of voluntary removals that I didn't know to pay attention to. But if your ancestor was born 1800 and you know that they were born in Georgia, they were born during Native Americans' territory and country, depending on when they ceded that land. So why the likelihood couldn't be that they connected with a Native American person, an indigenous person that was there at the time. So these were Indian agents. So as America needed to understand how to talk with the Native Americans, then they set up these agents. Each of these agents represented a tribe, and they covered different territories, and they were the law governing the body of law. So I'll say they were almost like, they weren't sheriffs. They were working with the sheriffs to carry out and to keep peace among the Native Americans and the Europeans who moved there to do business. So like that photo I showed of the Cartwrights working with the white man and his Native American wife, because that's what the story was. He had a store. He was doing business with providing goods to the body of people that was in that area. So someone had to regulate what was going on. And what the agents were doing, the agents were helping to approve your pass from A to B. If you wanted to go from Maryland and you needed to go over to Mississippi because you heard that their land was opening up, you had to get a pass. You had to get a pass that said you're a good character, someone vouches for you, and so you can pass through a safe passage. So the goal was you would show this pass and they would know that you're a good character, not to cause harm for the Native Americans that you're going to come across. If it was found that they stole their horse, or the Indians stole their horse, well, then the law would have to follow through and the agents had to get involved. And again, I'm showing that visual depiction of the Native Americans and their doing business with the Europeans and blending in relationships with them as well. So this is in those passes. I went and purchased some of these passes because I'm looking for slave names. That's what I'm looking for. But it's teaching me the language. It's teaching me what their expectations were. If you look on the right side, it says, many years that he has blood, character of a good citizen and worthy of the attention. A great deal of this had to do with the middle one. James Scarlett, attorney of the county and state, aforesaid having intimated an inclination to travel to the Mississippi and Louisiana country, and wishes to obtain a pass from His Excellency. And so it's really just talking about them traveling. This is in 1804. Them going back and forth, trying to see what the land is like, moving their family from this place to that place to set up shop, to do business there. And so that's what the purpose of these passes were. So I'm reading about these passes because I'm looking for slaves, families who brought slaves, and if there's any documentation of those names. So Benjamin Hawkins, well-documented, famous Indian agent, he was able to keep peace between the Creeks and the government for, they said, for about 16, no, I think it was 16, 17 years before he died. He was appointed by the president. His family was there out of North Carolina, then Georgia. And this is saying that it's been said his wife, Susan Lavinia Downs, was believed to be Creek. And so this particular ChatGPT said, whereas the evidence indicates that she was a white woman, but I've been reading books that says she was of Native American descent. This is saying he had 6 daughters, Muskogee, Cherokee. If you was fully white, why would you name your children Muskogee and Cherokee? You know. Then he named them after Presidents James Madison. But there's a reason I'll show you why he became of high interest to me. Because as I'm reading about Macon County, Alabama, this man's name is coming up. And the creeks are coming up. And now all of a sudden I'm like, I can't understand Macon County, Alabama, unless I understand what was going on in this period of time. Because now I've been remiss about the history and the true history of what was happening in the area where my grandmother and my mom then were living, and some of your families were living. So that's why I decided to do these sessions, because I'm learning so much wonderful information that I'm praying is going to help us figure out where to look for that breakthrough. But Benjamin Hawkins has said that his wife was of Creek Indian origin. This agent, William Bent, says he was a U.S. Indian agent for the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribe. Bent married Owl Woman, a Cheyenne woman and daughter of White Thunder, a prominent Cheyenne leader. So what I've been reading is as they started working with the tribes, then they had to sit in council with the tribes. As the tribes chiefs came together to do business, then they would actually appoint them to be a chief within the tribe and give them and work with them, within that, give them that prominency within the tribe. And then they took a wife. And so this is showing you that, if you have Bent as a last name, pulling out of whatever his history and his backstory is, then hey, that may be why. Little do we realize, especially given his children, if his sons were Bent or whatever his children were. The important notes: many such relationships were not always legally recognized. What happened with Benjamin Hawkins' case, before he died, he wanted to legitimize his children that he had, so he married, and that legitimized his children so that when he wrote his will, it would be governed accordingly. Because prior to that, another thing I learned while reading about the Native American culture, even though a European married a Native American, those children were governed by their mother and the uncles of that tribe, not the European men. They had nothing to do with the raising of those children and the wife. It was the uncles, probably the brothers, the chiefs, and that mother. So that was interesting to be able to see, and how they raised their families, their children, what their expectations were in those blended families. Europeans who married Native Americans. So those were the agents. These are just people. So this is saying Jane Johnston Schoolcraft. She was an Ojibwe mother and Irish American father. So some people, I've heard people say, oh, I'm of Ojibwe. What does that mean? It's a tribe, right? But you got to know the lay of the land. Where were the Ojibwes? Where were they located? Where were they situated? Because if your family is from that area, then you could possibly be Ojibwe, right? So this has a lot of reference links from ChatGPT of Michigan. So it must have been that in that area. It says Jane Johnson Schoolcraft is recognized as the first Native American literary writer. She was of Irish origin as well. And her father was a fur trader. Okay. Alexander McGilvray. All of these names are names you want to say, let me see if I got DNA matches to these names in Alabama, in Georgia. And then you want to take that to Oklahoma because of that migration from Georgia, Alabama, and then they went to Oklahoma. Then that could help you to understand that connection to the Oklahoma connections you have, where I have been struggling for years. How do I figure out these people? I don't know nothing about Oklahoma. How do I connect my Alabama descendants, my Alabama ancestors, my grandmother and her people, my mom's father and his people? How do I connect them to Oklahoma? Where is information? And it has been a struggle. So I'm sharing this with you because it should not be a struggle. And I love the fact that I'm committed to doing this body of work because it needs to be done. Alexander McGilvery was Creek Muskogee mother, Scottish father. He was big. His son, Lakeland McGilvery, his father was Lakeland McGilvery. His mother was Hoboy Hilly Miko, a Muskogee Creek leader. He was considered a Muskogee Creek leader, but they gave him the name Hoboy Hilly Miko. That name Miko I read, and I'll show you at some point later. If not this presentation, definitely next week. Where Miko was considered a tribal leader, a chief, or a leader. So all of these are interesting things I'm starting to read about the people that was there in that area of time. This gentleman, Jean Baptiste Dubé, this is somewhere I read the different spellings: D-U-B-E, D-U space Bay, and D-U Bay, Dubé. These are different variations of that name, but he was the son of a French trader and a Menominee Indian. And what I found amazing is as I look in their faces, they say you can't judge a book by a cover. Don't judge a person by what you see. I now have a better understanding of what that means, right? Because they don't look Native American to me. They don't. But it's not about how they look. And maybe they purposely was trying to hide it to some extent. We don't know. This is another one. Louis Riels, R-I-E-L, Riel. It's saying that his father was a Franco Chippewan Metis descent. Say all that. Organized a group that supported Guillaume Sire, but the Chippewan at the bottom are a Dene group of indigenous Canadian people belonging to the Athabascan language family whose ancestors are identified with the Talitha Shelley archaeological tradition. He's rearing out of Canada, but he's of Native American descent. And somewhere I shared in here where his French, let me see, loyal for Canada and Native American. Okay. Individuals with Native American and African origin. This is that third body of group now. And this is not just about the free, it's also the enslaved, but I may not show the enslaved photos in this way, but we know it exists, right? So William McIntosh, he was a Tustanugee Hutki, white warrior, chief of the Muskogee Creek Nation. Down here it says he was mixed Scottish ancestry and Native American. And so the screenshots that you're seeing, I pulled from so many different places, not to mention I bought a whole book because I needed to understand. I was looking for who's mixed. That's what's important to me, who's mixed, right? Because in those mixed relationships, if you mix with a Native American, you will probably, unfortunately, may possibly mix with a slave, indentured servant. And so we're looking for those connections. And I'll also show you next week about the conversation of the slaves amongst the Native American. So letters were written. So the passes existed, and then bodies of people were writing about what was happening in the area at that period of time. You're not going to find this in DNA. My goodness, this boggles my mind because I need to write it down and figure out who is who. So here I've underlined. This is talking about, I forgot who was writing this. I think I know, it'll come to me who was writing this story. But basically he's saying the McIntosh family is next. So he's talking about all the different families of people that he's coming across. So this is here he's saying, for I knew a half brother of Billy and Rollin, who was a full white man. I think he told me his father was Lakeland McIntosh. So we know the McIntosh are mixed. Billy and Rowland were half brothers. His oldest daughter by a Creek woman was named Jane. She married Billy Mitchell, a son of the then agent. After that, she married Sam Hawkins, who was killed at the same time McIntosh was. She then married Hetty Carr. So now we have this Indian woman who married Billy Mitchell, Sam Hawkins, Hetty Carr. And you could be a descendant of her through any of these three names. His McIntosh other Creek children were Chili. He was Chili McIntosh, known to be a warrior, a chief, and Lewis, sons, and Hetty and Lucy, daughters. His daughter by the Cherokee woman married Ben Hawkins, the brother of Sam. So now I'm like, who is this Sam Hawkins and this Ben Hawkins? And let me help you to be clear. This is not the Ben Hawkins that I mentioned earlier who was an agent. He was another agent, but I believe he stepped in as an agent after Ben Hawkins died, or he could have been an assistant to Ben Hawkins. I do believe he was like a nephew or something of that relationship. I'm trying to research that because I have DNA connection to this. In last week's sessions, someone searched for Hawkins and she literally pulled up Ben Hawkins as well. Exactly. That's what we talk about, Amanda. So Ben was killed many years ago in Texas. So there was still contention, right? So the Native Americans, some were giving in, some were saying, let's fight this to the death. Let's not give up our land. So that's where those Red Creek Indians were coming in. That's where those wars were coming in. And then if they ceded their land against what the tribe wanted, oh, they died. Oh, they got killed. So up here it's talking about so and so was killed at the same time, such and such was killed. That's because they ceded the land and no one told them to. But now they got to go. So now we're seeing the blending of native names with European names. So Poitli Yoholo's son, Dick, called Dick Johnson. Oh my gosh. So as we're researching, we got to know the blending of both of these, especially if we're trying to figure out a Native American connection. Ben Hawkins' widow married Spire M. Haggerty, who before that had a daughter of C.T. Cornell's for a wife. These names are going to get pulled out for you next week. I promise you, you will be excited about having a better understanding, especially about Alabama Native American researching and as well as any other area. There were other censuses that were done. I covered that last week. But this is how we can use those censuses to help us make sense. But you got to know the lay of the land. You got to know who the players are. You got to get away from DNA and start doing some reading and some researching. So this was just helping you to understand the complexity of what was going on in those Native American relationships. This is I'm not going to read this entire big section. Thomas Woodard. I knew I would figure out who was writing that. So Thomas Woodward was this famous name I had seen, didn't know who he was. Now I do. But as he traveled from place to place, he would write about the people he met and the things that were happening. And it's amazing to see all these names starting to get pulled out so that we can understand their connections and their relationships. Cornells, Jim Cornells, Alexander Cornells, they were part Indian. Zach McGirth, he is prominent in some of the records I'll show next week as well, where he sat amongst the chief tribe, the chiefs, for business, right? Doing counsel amongst the tribes, calling order of business. So all of these are things that we want to be able to slow down and take a look at and read. William Walker. So William Walker, as you can see on this page at the top, he died in Macon, Alabama in 1836. He was considered chief big warrior. And down here at the bottom, it said William was married to Tustenuggee local Cornell's daughter. Okay, so if all these children that we can see up here, Adeline Crittenden, Cynthia Walker Henderson, Darkus Duke George Walker, Tia Kia Walker, and William Walker. At some point, when you find out who they married, and you start searching DNA matches for these people in Macon County, Alabama, to the name either Cornells or Walkers or Dukes, because they remained behind, right? Because they intermarried chiefs and they were of European descent. So they either went to Oklahoma or they stayed behind. But this is how we flush out those connections of our family who remained in Macon, Bullock, Pike, Barber area, and who have said to us the oral history that we are of Native American descent, and we're trying to figure this out. So Osceola Creek, a Seminole leader, he was something. James McQueen was a Scots-Irish fur trader. And down here it says James McQueen was the first white man I ever heard of being among the Creeks. He was born in 1683, went into the nation in 1716, and died in 1811. He married a Tallahassee woman. This is how we look and we try to figure out our connection to the Native Americans. But I will tell you, when I do this kind of research, I can't focus on DNA. I have to focus on what I'm looking at so I can make it make sense. You can't be all over the place when you're looking and researching particular areas. That's why I knew I wasn't ready for Native American. I wasn't ready, but I feel I'm better ready now. And this is just breaking down a little bit more of the children that were born of the McQueens and who they connected with and their Native American connections, and then who their children connected with. And so, of course, if any of them got with slaves, that piece that's not told, then that's where we can find our connection, right? Okay. Keziah, Tukabachi, Cornels. So I'm paying attention to these Cornels names. And I think the more I'm looking and the more I'm looking, the more next week I'll show how this Cornels name is tied to free people of color. And so I'll be able to share how I'm researching that and pulling that out from these records. So this is just showing her. She married Joseph Cornels. Her children were Lucy Cornels and Lavisha Vicey Cornels. Then she married Alexander McGilvery, who was also called her boy Healy Rico. They had Davy Cornels, George Washington Cornels, and Atoki Haujo, and James Jim Cornels. And then down here it says she later married Alexander Ochi Haujo Cornels, and they had a daughter, Suki Cornels. So I'll tell you, this is probably the profile I created because I'm doing all of this researching and I'm trying to make this make sense. And if I've highlighted something, that's because there's something that was written that I'm trying to prove and I'm trying to research. And this helps me to visualize and to really be able to see it better than I could if it was in records or even in ancestry. So why were these names not known? And mainly because they were Native American origin. They were somewhat forbidden. They didn't really write or read English. And so they kind of were lost. And that's why, they went from being really truly called Native American to free people of color, not to mention they were blended origin. So they were not going to, they're one or the other. What do we call them is probably what happened. So they just decided to call them free people of color. Native American chiefs and descendants who married Europeans. So this was strongly about the chiefs. Oh, I'm sorry. Native American, this is the wrong slide. This should have been Native American and African heritage. So now this is prominent people who are of Native American descent and African heritage. So this particular person, Paul Cuff, I've heard some people mention this name. Okay. But I wanted to be able to call it out and have a better understanding. So Paul Cuff is an African father from the Ashanti or Akan ancestry and a Wampanoag mother, one of the wealthiest Black men in early America. So that's who he was. He was a blended origin, right? Then this is Nassamon tribal origin, the Nassamon Indian or Bass family. So many of us can truly say, oh, I've seen DNA connections and matches to the name Bass. I'm connected to Bass. But where is this connection? How do we understand why are they identified as Native American? So the information is out there. This is just showing that John Bass married Elizabeth Nessimond, and they had the son William Bass, and he married Catherine Lanier. And then it goes on to explain John Bass, an English colonist to Elizabeth, baptized daughter of the chief of Nessimond tribe. So Elizabeth Nessimond was of the Native American origin. And that's how the Bass name became Native American. It's not from him, but without reading and understanding where that connection hits, you completely miss it. And I don't want to say I'm just related to somebody because it's in somebody's tree. I want to understand it so that I can figure out my connection to it. Benjamin Banneker, who has not heard of him, but Benjamin Banneker, this is saying, believe his mother, which we would have read in the Free People of Color. I had studied his line months ago. But Mary Bannaky may have been a mixed African and Piscataway or Susquehannock heritage. So it would have been through her where it was thought that she was of Native American origin. Could you be a descendant of the Melungeon group? Why not? This is a photo of 1800 Alabama and Georgia. 1800. So if you can get your ancestor in your tree somewhere near 1800, 1810, this is what the lay of the land looked like. You have to do your diligence to know where they're saying. And a lot of times I've been seeing they're saying they're born in Georgia, born in Virginia. No place. But that year is going to help you to flush it out. And those records are going to help you to track where our family member has been passed down or passed through, as far as their slaveholders went. This is a photo of those two states, Georgia and Alabama, and all of the circles represents the seeding of the land, and the numbers represent the time period when it got seeded to America. And so you have to know the date the county was formed so that you can see what it looked like at the date that you were researching. All of those things are important things to know. Now, this is the good part. So this is something that you guys can work on yourself. So what I'm going to do, I needed to figure out, now that we know we say we're Native American, what does it mean? How do we figure this thing out? So I'm going to step you through some steps I did in GEDmatch. Yes, it can feel complicated, but this is recorded, and I'm going to take you step by step of what it looks like, and you can do it yourself to figure out where is Native American in your DNA. Then how do you find your DNA in Native American with the possibility of other people in GEDmatch to possibly see if you're related through your Native American connection? Because that's the point of all of this, right? It's difficult trying to prove your origin or your heritage, your connection to them. So I was able to do a little something to help me to see how I could try to figure that out. So here we go. So once you're in GEDmatch and you've uploaded your DNA and now you have your kit number, everybody on here has done that. So what you're going to want to do, I'm glad Annette is coming now. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to, in GEDmatch, choose free tools and add mixture. So this is the step. I think you can do Oracle, but no. We're going to do GEDmatch, free tools, and add mixture. So you don't have to have a paid account to do this particular step that I'm doing right here. You can do it with a free account. So once you've chosen add mixture, now that I enlarged it, there we go. Now that you've chosen add mixture, you're going to go to the drop down and you're going to choose the option in the list that says DODACAD. And I was like, I can do what people tell me, but I want to have an understanding of what does it mean, just so that, you know what I mean? Don't tell me to jump off the ledge. I want to know why. So DODACAD is a genetic ancestry project created by this researcher, launched in 2010, and it was one of the first publicly available tools aimed at providing detailed ethnicity breakdowns using autosomal. So when we upload our DNA from Ancestry, MyHeritage, 23andMe, those are autosomal tests. And so, and DotaCAD means a group of 12. So this is pretty much kind of showing us, and I'll show you the slide, the, the areas that our autosomal is telling us it's originating from, right? And it uses SNP-based analysis. So we started learning how to add SNP to some of our comparisons we do in GEDmatch to be able to get some lower centimorgan representation. That's what adjusting your SNPs can do for you. So, all right. So once you've chosen DotaCAD, this is explaining to you what DotaCAD means. So in choosing DotaCAD, not just DotaCAD, but these are the different geographic origins. This is not all of them. Each of the different drop downs provides a different number or areas of origin. So Amerindian, East Asian, African, Atlantic, Baltic, Australian, Siberian, Caucasus, Gedrosia, Southern, and South Asian. If you're like me, this ain't enough. What's in Caucasus, Gedrosia? So I'm going to tell you what's in each of them so that you have a better understanding of your representation. So in the Amerindian, it is Native American tribes, Algonquin, Iroquois, Mesoamerican groups, Mayans, Zapotecs, Indian and Amazonian groups, and the Arctic people. Geographic coverage entirety of North, Central, and South America, because that's where the Native Americans were, the indigenous people, right? So any parts of the North, Central, South, that's what this is going to cover. So that's why we're trying to use GEDmatch to help us better flush out where those connections are coming from. Okay. East Asian, Han Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, Taiwanese, Aboriginals, Southeast Asian populations, Vietnamese, Thai, Burmese, etc. Geographic coverage, Eastern and Southern Asia. I just find it interesting when I have connections here, and I have yet to figure that out. African. Many of us are understanding our African connection. Many of the other websites, MyHeritage, 23andMe, do a really good breakdown of helping us to see where these countries are coming from. I think Ancestry is trying to step up their game as well. But so especially as African Americans, we get this part. All the countries that are covered in the African. Atlantic, Baltic, North and East European. And I'm glad I'm paying this some attention. I also have Germanic, right? So as I'm looking at Baltic, now I have a better understanding. Oh, that's covering Germany. Makes sense when I see that. European, East European rather, North and East. Okay, makes sense for me to see that when I see Atlantic Baltic now. British Isles and Northern France. Geographic coverage, Baltic Sea area, Northern and Eastern France. What's so interesting with this, as you know, just found out last year, I'm half Jamaican and England and UK. So I now have a strong understanding of that. But my grandmother also descends from UK. I mean, England, all of us do for the most part, because they were the ones that migrated here and took over the land, right? So that's why we have such strong connections to the UK. So Atlantic Baltic is that representation in GEDmatch. Australian, Aboriginal Australians, Melungeon, and some Oceanic Islanders, Polynesians sometimes. Geographic coverage, Australia, New Guinea, parts of Oceania. And Siberian, Indigenous Siberian populations, Tungusic, Uralic, and Paleo-Siberian. May overlap with circumpolar groups. Siberia, Northern Asian area, group coverage area. Caucasus, Gedrosia. The Caucasus Mountain peoples, Georgians, Armenians, Iranian plateau, and parts of the Fertile Crescent. Gedrosia refers to the ancient region near Iran, Pakistan. Caucasus, Iran, parts of Pakistan, and Afghanistan. So now I have a better understanding of that area, if I see it in representation, of course. Southern European groups, Italians, Greeks, and Albanians. Now I understand the difference between my European. If I happen to see Southern, I know that that's going to be a different area. Balkan populations, possibly some influence from Levant and North Africa. South Europe and bordering Mediterranean areas. Okay. South Asian, Indian subcontinent, Indians, Pakistanis, Sri Lankans, Bangladeshis, Indigenous Dravidian populations, tribal and caste-based genetic pools in the region. Genetic coverage, South Asia, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, etc. So these labels are interpreted. So, especially when we have scientists and man trying to help us to understand things, they want us to know that it's interpreted and to look at it in that way. But for many of us who are not geneticists, it's amazing. So, whoever did this, it's amazing. So, here we go. So, under admixture, now that you've chosen Dodecan, you want to choose the second option. Well, I'm going to break down a couple of the others, but the second option, appropriations by chromosome. So after you chose that option, and this is showing you all of the ones that I actually chose out of that long list that I have, and then this is what mines look like. And you will get your own breakdown. Stop, don't do it too much. Amerindian is first. So I wanted to know about my Indian ancestry. And this is every chromosome through 22, what percentage we have. So, of course, my Africans are in purple. The top chart is from Ancestry. The bottom chart is from 23andMe. And I wanted you to see the different representations of what the DNA look in the different testing platforms, because they're doing different things. So it's helpful to be able to triangulate your connections using your different DNA, and GenMatch gives us that ability. So what this is showing you is I have Native American on chromosome 1, 3. I have it on many others. 6, 7, 9, 10, 12, 14, 17, 18, and 20, and 21. But and this is comparing Ancestry and 23andMe. But what the colors represent, the green means between the different testing platforms, I have a consistent Native American on chromosome 20. And I have another chart I'll show you. And the yellow shows the next level that I have at least 2 connections on those chromosomes between the different testing platforms. Green is 3, green may be 4, yellow is 3, and red is 2. So what that means is, let's say, for instance, I take your DNA and I'll show you. Well, we can do that, right? I take your GenMatch kit, I take mine, I compare. I don't see that we have a match at all on whatever chromosome. Well, I got to know what chromosome is my American Indian showing on, so that I can compare apples to apples. So that's why this is a chart I've always loved. Oh, the top part, yeah, is me and ancestry. 23andMe. This is my brother ancestry and my heritage. He didn't do a 23andMe. But again, the green shows my brother and I consistently have Native American on chromosome 20. We have at least 2, 3 connections between each other on chromosome 9, 14, 17, and 18. And we have the least consistent connections on chromosome 1 and 3. And the other ones are spots. So even though I may have American Indian chromosome 2, my brother does it, and I don't have it in the other testing platforms. So when I want to compare Native American, I'm going to stick strongly to these chromosomes. Now, the only other thing I want to show you, I remember now, is I did a different thing. Where is this different thing I did? Chromosome 10. I added chromosome 10 because if you look at chromosome 10 under the bottom one here, it shows I have 4.5% and chromosome 20 says 5.4%. And all of the other ones tend to have lower than 1%. So the more percentage you get above 1%, the stronger the visual representation will be seen, and the more DNA we got from that origin, that heritage. The second one you can do is you go back to admixture, you chose DOTA-CAT, now you want to do chromosome painting. And this is going to show you every chromosome that what your representation looks like. The red is, and then slider means you want to go all the way to the right. Now the work with GEDmatch is this. We know if we can get segments, starts, and ends in numbers, then we can have a good way of being able to say, okay, this is what I want to research. So if my particular, this is saying at 20 million and 30 million is all the way over here, well, then my indigenous is hitting somewhere near 23 million to 26 million max. So now I have a range. If I want to do a comparison on chromosome 1 between 23 million and 26 million, who hits me in this position? And I'll show you later what that's going to look like, because that's that piece where now we can take this DNA genetic makeup, the segments, the chromosome, and make it make sense with how do we connect with other people. The slider just means there's more on that chromosome. I have more red in other areas, smaller glimmers of numbers. So it's not just one number. As you can see, at probably 22 million, I had a sliver of red over here. So all of these are areas that can be represented, that can be researched. They're smaller areas, and there's an overlap on chromosome 4. Now, I don't remember what orange is. Orange is East Asian. So on chromosome 4, I have all this overlap hitting me right here. What I don't know is if this person that's related to me, we got to also remember, this does not say maternal or paternal. I'm going to show you how I was able to break that apart. But you have to discern if it's maternal or paternal. So this is interesting to see, you know. So there's still some work we have to do, but it gets us a little bit closer than where we were. Now look at chromosome 10. This is why I mentioned to you about chromosome 10. Chromosome 10 is amazing. So I just got to connect with someone who hits me somewhere near 6 million and whatever is in front of that other side. And if I do that segment search between there and I get me some matches coming back in GEDmatch and I see people names, I'm cooking with gas, right? So that's how we make this make sense right here. And again, if there's a slider, there's more to the right or to the left. Okay. So I just wanted you to be able to see these representations of American Indian that's going to be in your DNA if you choose these particular settings that I showed you. And the yellow, I think yellow is American, Atlantic, Baltic, and remember, that's my European. Europeans all over the place. My grandmama got European, but my daddy is Jamaican European. And I've done the research to connect with DNA matches, so I know where they're coming from. So this is how you make that make sense. Now, if I take my kid and your kid, and I compare the two, because I want to see where do we match in our Native American in the same position. So this is how you do that. You go back to DOTA-CAT, you choose the last option. Paint the differences between two people. And this is what this looks like. So in playing around, I chose Lawrence, so cousin Lawrence. And I said, okay, Lawrence, so this is what this looks like. This is the reduced size. It's all squished so that we can see it all. But the challenge this way is you really don't get to see all the numbers well, because on chromosome 9, there's a tiny sliver and you probably can't even see it. So this is what, when I look at the breakdown, what it looks like from each chromosome between his kid, my kid, and both of our kids. So Lawrence and I overlap Oh, I'm sorry. I should have shown you that slide and I didn't. Okay. So on right here where it says you want to compare the difference between two kids on one chromosome. Choose a chromosome between two people. And now what you're going to do is you're going to go in, you're going to say, so I chose chromosome 20. Was it chromosome 10? I chose chromosome 1. I chose chromosome 1 between Lawrence and I. The top is my kid. The second one is his kid. But as you can see, just from the picture alone, from 20 million, he and I overlap. And right here, the bottom third is where we overlap collectively. So he and I share a Native American ancestor at 23 million to 25.5 million. You play with the numbers. And so what I did, I wanted to play with those numbers. So this is just showing another kit between Lawrence, my kit, his kit, and on chromosome 2 in this position, there is no match. There is no match. The black means no match. So this is a really great way of being able to do these cross comparisons. If you go all the way to the right, where it says 60 million, he and I are hitting on some turquoise, a hint of green, not a lot. So this is why we don't see these representations in ancestry, especially when they cut the centimorgans off at 8. And we may not see it in other testing platforms because it's so small. So having GEDmatch gives us this ability to do this deeper dive. So if you remember, I said, okay, Lawrence and I was chromosome 1, about 20 million, beginning to 20 million in. So now under, this is where you have to pay to play. Under tier 1, you choose segment search because you're guesstimating about the different distance between that connection from beginning to end. And you're going to come here and you're going to choose the top is standard. The SNPs you can change, but don't if you don't know what to do with the SNPs. But I did change the SNP to 50. That allows me to look at lower centimorgans. And then I entered chromosome 1, and I said 25 million to 28 million. You have to type in the beginning and the end range. And that's what I did at the bottom. And then I said, show the graphic bar between the two chromosomes. And so now this is the list of people who were returned between Lawrence and myself. And that's chromosome 1, 28 million to 30 million. And when I saw the list, David Williams and Davy Williams is the same person. Patricia Bernard is the same person. They are all my connections out of Jamaica and UK. So that means Lawrence is definitely going to be hitting UK and possibly Jamaica. Don't know if he knew that. But the 3 bottom people, Z, Norma, and Sophia, they're a little new to me. And they may be my stronger possible native connection because, again, I said, GEDmatch doesn't tell you if it's maternal or paternal. And I know my paternal is Jamaica and UK. So that Native American could be pulling from these other 3 names here. Z, Normal, and Sophia. So I put a check box. I checked off these 3. I do believe I did. So I did him, I did me, and then I said, let me take a look at the people who match him. So I did him and one of my matches. So I chose the top match, Z. Her kit was AT5. So I chose that kit, and I said, let me see who matches Lawrence and her. And I took it down to 7 centimorgans. Now again, chromosomes, I'm sorry. I took it down to 7 chromosomes. Centimorgans. Now remember, there are steps, right? It can be mind-blowing, I know. But you have to be mentally ready to start paying this part some attention so you can get something out of it. And I don't play with this part until I'm ready. I wasn't looking at Native American. I didn't know what to do with it. But now I have some meat on this bones to start throwing it at GEDmatch to see what it brings me back. So as I compared his kit with my top match, I look for anything that has Jed in this column over here at the right because they have a tree. If you know, the goal is to look in their tree. There were other people as well, but these are people who match him and my other cousin, so they're probably going to match me. And then as I look at their tree, I click on Jed, I click on pedigree, I come here and then look at the chart. This is straight out of Brazil, this person here. So I got back to him. I said, he asked me, did you find what you were looking for? I said, I think I did, but did you know you were strongly connected to out of Brazil? And probably me also. So this is how you use the tools with the research and the DNA. And if you are researching pre 1870, you got to slow down and start doing some reading and get into some records, and so that you can learn the lay of the land. But when you're ready to start doing this comparison of the Native American piece, I believe GEDmatch is going to be the key to help us. Next week, I'm going to talk about Native American and how to use the census to be able to see the slave people. Now that you're getting a sense of the names of the people who are chiefs and the tribes, I'm going to share with you this case study of Lucy and her fight for freedom for her family. And then the last session of this month is I really want to show you about WikiTree, because between the work I'm adding to WikiTree and the work WikiTree's even helped me to find new ancestors, I believe it's going to be the game changer we all need. And that is the end of my slide, guys. I didn't do too bad. Yay me! All right, you can come off, feedback, answers and questions and answer time. You got to come off, speaker. Don't come off at once.
This is going to be, you've recorded this, right? It's going to appear, because I came late. I want to be able to go back and take a look.
I said, I'm so glad she came.
I almost totally missed it. I keep thinking, I get the time zones confused.
Oh, yeah.
So, I don't know what time when you're posting 6 o'clock. I'm thinking that's 7 o'clock. So anyway, because I got you in Alabama.
We went to Alabama.
I know. All right. So I'll take a look, but you already answered a couple of questions for me in terms of how to get to that information. That's very helpful.
Phenomenal. Because yeah, Annette and I was talking earlier, and I told her, I said, Annette, I think I got you. I was messaging her and everything.